The first tremor had passed hours ago. The worst of the shaking had still leaving behind silence broken only by distant cries, and the low hum of generators. A rescue team worked in shifts, clearing wreckage from a collapsed apartment block in a remote border town, the kind of place too far from help and too close to forgotten Sergeant Daniel Danny. Roar moved carefully through the fractured hallway of the building's ground floor. Dust still hung in, the air like a ghost refusing to leave. Cracks split the walls like lightning frozen in stone. He swept his flashlight left to right, calling out with a voice from grit and exhaustion. Rescue team. Anyone inside? No answer. It was supposed to be a final sweep, just a last check before the building was marked unsafe for further entry. Then they'd move on, but fate has a way of waiting until the last minute to change everything. The groan of shifting concrete came first, then the scream of steel giving. Wade. Danny turned to run, but the floor beneath him dropped out like a trap door. The world flipped, the ceiling caved, and everything went black. When he came to, it was hard to breathe. A sharp pain shot through his left leg. He tried to move it, and screen pin crushed blood was already soaking through his uniform. Rubble pressed down on his chest, making every inhale feel like a war in itself. His radio was gone, smashed silent, his arm bruised, and shaking reached for it. Anyway, nothing. Danny blinked, trying to stay conscious. Dust coated his eyelashes. His helmet was gone. His voice could barely carry more than a whisper. Echo. He rasped. Echo. No one heard outside. The rest of the team had pulled back. They thought he was gone, buried too deep. No signal, no signs of life. The commander had already notified the rear base. They marked Danny Roar as presumed dead. But Echo knew better. The German shepherd trained for combat, and search refused to be still. He paced, whined, barked once sharp and short, then darted back toward the rubble, ignoring the handler, trying to keep him leashed. When he snapped free, he ran straight into the collapsed zone, nose to the ground, weaving through twisted steel and broken glass. Nothing could stop him beneath the rubble. Danny's eyes were closing again, his body cold, mind fading, then a sound of bark, muffled, distant, but real. He turned his head slightly, heart thudding. Another bark closer, now urgent, then a snuffling noise, a scratch against stone eyes. Lips parted, his eyes widened in disbelief. Echo. And for the first time since the building fell, a spark of life returned to his gaze. 1 year earlier, the training field was scorching under midday sun. Dust rose from every footfall. Drills echoed to the hills, and the barking of dogs rang out in tight control bursts. Echo had been one of the most promising K9s, and his unit sharp, fearless, and precise. But mistimed detonation during a live simulation changed everything. The blast hadn't been deadly, but it had been enough. Echo was found limping, his front leg fractured, a long, raw gash running down the left side of his face. His once flawless response to commands became erratic. He hesitated at obstacles. His focus, they said, had been compromised. The decision was swift, unfit for duty, recommend medical retirement. To command, it was practical protocol. To Sergeant Danny Roar, it was personal. Danny had seen a lot during his deployments, men broken in body and mind, discarded by the system they'd served. He knew the look of someone being left behind, and when he stepped into the kennel and saw Echo lying in, the coroner head resting on his paws, one eye still burning with alertness, he saw something else. Not defeat, not trauma, just waiting for someone who wouldn't give up, 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 for someone who wouldn't give up. It raised eyebrows. You're not a handler. They told him he needs a lot of retraining. Danny simply replied, so do I. He wasn't exaggerating. Danny had been dealing with chronic back injuries from a prior mission and had been pulled from frontline duty. Doctors had given him a choice: transition to a desk or leave the field. He chose something in between. Search and rescue paired with canine support. Rehabilitation became their shared mission. Danny spent hours reteaching Echo the fundamentals: sit, stay, down, heal. But it wasn't about commands. It was about rebuilding trust, confidence, purpose. At first, Echo struggled. He flinched at sudden sounds, refused certain jumps. His leg healed, but the hesitation lingered. Danny never raised his voice, never rushed. He just showed up every single day. By month 3, Echo responded to voice again. By month 5, he was tracking scents over rough terrain. By month 6, he could distinguish between 10 different hand signals, including a set Danny created just for them, subtle gestures no one else would even notice. They learned each other's rhythms, how Danny would shift slightly before command, how Echo's ears twitched just before locking in on a scent. They could work for hours without speaking a word, just instinct, trust. They weren't handler and dog. They were partners. Danny stopped reporting Echo's progress to the unit. There was no need to prove anything anymore. He knew, and so did Echo. They were both a little broken, a little scarred, but they were moving forward together, and in that quiet bond, something stronger than duty or protocol took Rude, it was a kind of bond that doesn't need explaining, the kind that one day would be called upon when all hope seemed lost. The sky above was clouded with dust. The rescue zone was chaos. Cranes groaned, radios crackled, and the air was thick with smoke and grit. The fallen building was a twisted mass of concrete slabs and mangled rebar. Heat shimmered off the rubble, and every second ticked louder than the last. No one expected anyone to survive the collapse. Sergeant Danny Rock had gone and alone for a final sweep. When the building gave way, his name was added to the list of presumed casualties. But Echo refused to believe that the German shepherd had been pacing since the moment the ground shook. Every attempt to leash or restrain him failed. When handlers tried to calm him, he growled, not with aggression, but with desperation. He kept pulling toward the ruins, refusing to break eye contact with the jagged hole where Danny had last been. Seeing Echo stand down, one of the officers barked, but Echo didn't listen. He let the tape line dodge between debris and rescue workers, nose low, tail stiff, moving with purpose, his sense of smell honed through months of training. And the bond he shared with Danny ignored the gasoline, the smoke, the burning plastic. It followed one thread thin, but unbroken. Danny, a soldier, moved to intercept that dog's gone rogue, but before he could catch him, Echo barked twice, then darted into a gap beneath the collapsed floor. What is he doing? Someone shouted, get him out of there. But one of the medics paused. His eyes followed the line of Echo's body, where he stopped, where he sniffed. How he began digging furiously, his front paws scraping concrete, his jaw gnawing, exposed would have widened the space. Wait. The medic said, he's not lost. He's found something inside the rubble. Danny drifted in and out of consciousness, his body pinned, his breath shallow darkness wrapped around him like a second skin. Then a sound, scratching, breathing. His shadow moved to the narrow beam of dusty light, and then a face, muzzle covered in ash, eyes locked on his. Echo, Danny whispered. The dog crept forward until his snout pressed against Danny's shoulder. His body trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of squeezing through such a tight space. He licked Danny's cheek. Once whined softly. Danny raised one shaking hand, fingers curling into their signal, a barely their motion, but it was enough. Go! Echo understood. He backed out, whining louder now, barking as he turned and bounded back the way he came. He reached the surface, ran straight to the nearest soldier, and lashed his teeth gently into the man's sleeve. Then he pulled the soldier, yelping surprise. What the Echo barked again, tugging toward the collapsed zone this time. They listened. A small team followed as Echo led them across the debris, retracing his path, stopping suddenly at the exact point he had tunneled through. Echo began digging again, faster this time. The others joined and picked shovels. Hands. A minute passed, then two, then, I see him, someone shouted. A flesh of dyes, uniform, and arm pulse. He was alive. One rescuer turned, eyes wide with disbelief. If that dog hadn't brought us here, we never would have found him in time. Echo stood nearby, panting, his paws bloody, his chest heaving. But his eyes never left the hole, waiting to see his partner pulled free. The rescue team worked like men possessed. The moment Echo barked and began clawing at the rubble, everything changed. Orders were shouted, equipment was rolled, and radios lit up with urgency. Clear this section. Echo found something. They began digging where the dog had led them, forcing their way through shattered concrete and twisted metal. Every layer revealed more destruction. Steel rods warped from the collapsed slabs, heavier than any man should lift, and dust thick enough to choke the light 3 layers of concrete. It took nearly an hour. The team rotated every 5 minutes, muscles burning, hands bloodied, sweat mixing with grime. Through it all, Echo stayed stationary, vigilant, ears pricked forward. He never moved more than a few feet from the spot. When someone slowed, he barked. When they paused, he growled low. It was as if a heartbeat had become a metronome for their urgency. Then a shout of flashlight beams struck a patch of fabric half buried in dirt. Slowly a body emerged, covered in gray dust, arm pinned awkwardly beneath a beam. Helmet cracked. The medic rushed forward, fingers to the neck, pulse faint. But he's alive. It was Danny, barely breathing, skin pale, lips cracked. But in his right hand, tightly clenched, was a small strip of black nylon, a torn piece of Echo's service vest. Let's get him out now. They worked fast, delicately. Once his chest was clear, Danny took a ragged breath. They slid him onto a stretcher, strapped him in, and radioed from medevac. Helicopter's blades could be heard in the distance, growing louder as they carried Danny through the path they just cleared. Echo followed at first, pacing behind, then moving up to walk alongside the stretcher, one paw matching every beat of the soldier's motionless body. The others made way. No one dared stop him. Outside, sunlight filtered through smoke and ash as the medics loaded Danny into the chopper. Echo tried to climb in with him. Sir, the dog. The flight nurse raised a hand. Let him come. Inside the helicopter, Echo lay at Danny's feet, eyes locked on his partner's face as the aircraft lifted. Hours later at the military hospital, Danny opened his eyes slowly. Everything was blurry, muffled. A heartbeat monitor pulsed steadily. Beside him, an oxygen mask covered his mouth. A shape moved nearby. Thorough, familiar echo curled at the foot of the bed. Danny blinked once, then lifted a shaking hand toward the edge of the mattress. Echo was there in seconds, his head resting gently against Danny's palm. Danny's voice was a breath barely audible, but the nurse beside him heard it. He found me the video footage taken by a combat cameraman of Echo tugging a soldier's sleeve, of him digging with bloody paws, of him trotting beside the stretcher, was broadcast. Within hours, K9 saved Sержант in miracle rescue. The headline ran on every military news outlet, then crossed over civilian channels within 24 hours. It had racked up over 6 million views. Online comment sections overflowed with tears, prayers, and praise. We don't deserve dogs like this. This is what loyalty looks like. Echo, the real hero. Danny was still unconscious when the video aired, but Echo lying by his side, ears twitching at every noise, didn't need to see it. He had already done what he was born to do. He had brought his partner home. Recovery was steady, and it was never done alone. Danny woke to a world of pain, bruised lungs, fractured ribs, a shattered leg. But every time he opened his eyes, Echo was there, alive beside the bed, watching, waiting, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Weeks past the hospital gave way to rehab. The crutches gave way to a cane. And through every hard-fought inch of progress, Echo matched him step for step, breath for breath. They moved like one being, as they always had. Danny wasn't just healing from the collapse. He was healing from everything that came before. The years of carrying pain silently, of watching brothers fall in combat, of returning home with invisible wounds no scan could detect. He began to see what Echo had truly done. He hadn't just dug him out of rubble. He'd given him back his purpose. After receiving an honorable medical discharge, Danny didn't choose rest. He chose mission. He launched a nonprofit organization called Echo's Coda program that paired returning veterans with rescue dogs, focusing on trauma recovery through K9 companionship and training. The tagline was simple: sometimes healing comes on 4 legs. Within months, Echo's Code was working with VA hospitals and vet centers across the state. Former soldiers, many of whom hadn't smiled in years, were laughing again, talking again, trusting again, and all because of one dog who had refused to let his partner be forgotten. The military recognized Echo's service in a ceremony held on base. A flag whipped by wind, he was awarded the Guardian of Life Medal. The first time in unit history a non-human had been given such an honor. Danny stood beside him, still using a cane, dressed in his formal uniform. Echo sat tall, chest out, eyes bright. The applause rolled over them like ocean waves. But neither of them needed the noise. They had already said everything that mattered in silence. One evening months later, Danny took Echo for a walk along the beach. Near his hometown, the sun was sinking low, casting gold over the waves. The wind smelled of salt and pine. They walked in sync. As always, one man, one dog. At one point, Danny paused to look out at the water. Echo sat beside him, staring not at the ocean, but at him, tail wagging, eyes soft. Danny looked down, smiling gently. He reached down and ruffled the fur behind Echo's ear. "You didn't just find me under the rubble, boy," he said. "Quietly you found me when the world thought I was already gone." Echo leaned into him, and they stood there too. Souls would save each other, letting the last light of day remind them home isn't a place, it's a heartbeat beside yours. There are heroes who never carry a weapon, and warriors who never speak a word. Echo was more than a search and rescue dog. He was instinct, emotion, loyalty, made flesh, the silent echo of a bond that can't be broken. He didn't need medals to prove his worth, or words to tell a story. He only needed one thing: someone worth saving. And he found him in the darkest hour beneath steel and stone, when breath was fading and hope had all but slipped away. It wasn't a siren or shout that brought Sergeant Danny roar back to life. It was a bark, a scratch, a heartbeat that refused to give up, because sometimes the only thing keeping us alive is knowing someone out there still believes we're worth finding. This is Echo's story, but it's also the story of every soul saved not by chance, but by love that never quit. Thank you for joining us for the unforgettable story of Sergeant Danny Rower and his loyal partner Echo, a story not just of survival, but of unshakable trust, silent courage, and the kind of love that never lets go. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the power of loyalty, or gave you hope in the face of darkness, we invite you to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories here on this channel. We celebrate real-life stories where animals aren't just companions, they're hero stories that lift the human spirit, heal the heart, and remind us what truly matters.